Hello students, and welcome to the Biology of Sex. We're going to start this week's lesson, Male Anatomy. I'm going to break this up into a couple different videos for you, so feel free to do this in chunks. Make sure you're taking your own notes so that you have something to go back to whenever you're preparing for the exam. And of course, you're welcome to replay the video or videos as many times as you like. So let's get started with male anatomy. We're going to do the adult reproductive system. Okay, one of the most logical places for us to start is with the male gonad, or the testis. Okay, most males have two testes. Okay, that's the plural form of the word, and the singular is testis. So if we're just talking about one. What we're looking at in the view here, the image is what we call in anatomy and physiology a sagittal section. What they've done here is, you can see the model, we've taken a human and we've kind of cut them in half, and you can see the way that the plane is dividing the body. So we can see kind of half of what's going on in the reproductive system here, and we get a good view of these internal structures. So we're going to spend the bulk of today talking about the testes. Okay. They are the male gonad. Again, gonad is just a general term referring to the organ that is going to make hormones and make our sex cells. The equivalent in females is going to be the ovary. So if we want to be more specific and talk about the male gonad, it is the testis or testes if we're talking about two. Okay, the jobs that we have to do here is, one, to produce hormones. They're going to fall into a category called androgens. Androgen literally means man-forming. These hormones are going to give us a lot of our secondary sexual characteristics, the things that if you look at a man, you're going to be able to recognize them as such. And also, these hormones are going to be really important in forwarding this process of producing sperm, or the male gamete. Again, gamete is just going to be a general term for a sex cell. Sperm cell is going to be very specific to the ones that we're making in males. We will also touch on the secondary structures. So these things are important also for reproduction in the adult system. However, they're not as important as the testes. We could do nothing, right? Nothing without the testes. They are really running the show here, and the secondary structures are just that. Secondary, necessary, but also secondary to those testes. More about that network of ducts and glands later as we get deeper into the presentation. Let's move on to the testes. Okay, we're on the next slide. This is a different view that we're looking at. This is a frontal view. So now that we can see the body basically from the front, we're really cropped here, right? So we're just looking at the male reproductive organs of interest. Okay, so we're just going to take a look there. Okay, and now we really can see both testes organs from the front, but the dissection is done a little bit differently on both sides. So we have a much deeper dissection over here. We've gone through this outer tissue, the scrotum. We can see that there are a couple layers in there going deeper and deeper, and we can actually see, right, the individual structure, the testes there. So it is indeed an egg-shaped organ. Like I said, this is our male gonad, and our main function here is to make sperm. We can observe on the slightly less dissected side, if we're looking over here, we can see some layers of muscle, we can see some tissues kind of wrapping and protecting. So we will get into those a little bit more in the future. If you've ever wondered what a testes looks like on the inside, well, we are now going to answer that question for you today. Turns out it looks like a lot of spaghetti. Just kidding. Okay. Looking at the inside here, there are some very tightly coiled structures, and they're organized into these little rooms. And they do indeed look a little bit like pasta, but we're going to clarify what the differences are there. Within these little rooms that are inside the testes, those are called lobules, and they're really just dividing up what we know to be the seminiferous tubules. So those are the guys that are really tightly coiled. They very much look like spaghetti kind of wrapped up in there. So we can say definitively that there are about 1 to 3 seminiferous tubules per lobule. We have lots of lobules in there, and these structures are coiled very tightly. Okay, so we can see the very tightly coiled seminiferous tubules in there. If we were curious, if we wanted to uncoil a tubule, we would find that it stretches about 1 to 3 feet. There's going to be anatomical variations from person to person. And there are about 800 tubules per testis. Again, testis is one singular. We have 2 testes in the human body. So, right, 1,600 tubules per the human body. And if we went so far as to really unwind them all and stretch them all out, the total length of the tubules would be greater than that of an American football field. So we find out we have a lot of real estate here. And what their function is to produce sperm cells. And they're going to be able to produce those sperm cells all along their length. So we've got an entire football field worth of length that is going to contribute to our sperm cell making factory. That process of making sperm, we're now going to give it a name. It's called spermatogenesis. So we have a lot of long words here kind of in the basic anatomy and physiology of the reproductive system. If we can break them down and make a little bit of sense of their Greek and Latin roots, it's going to give us a clue as to kind of what these words mean and what's going on. So we can see the word sperm in spermatogenesis. So that's telling us that is something to do with that cell. And a genesis is a starting point or a beginning. So this is telling us this is the beginning of sperm cells. This is the process of making them from scratch. What we make in this process of spermatogenesis is we basically go from a stem cell to something called a spermatid. And it turns out that's really only about half of the process. Right? A spermatid is what we refer to as an immature sperm cell. So then that spermatid has to undergo a second process called spermiogenesis, where we transform that immature spermatid into the mature spermatozoa. So spermatozoa is the formal term. When most people say sperm cells, they're talking about our spermatozoa. And we're just calling them sperm cells for short. Now, this process is lengthy. The entire maturation process can take 2 to 3 months. So the sperm cells that you're ejaculating today and using for reproduction are not the ones that you made yesterday. They are the ones that you made 2 or 3 months ago. What we're going to do in the next couple of slides is take a look at these seminiferous tubules. And we're actually going to cut one open and look inside. And we can see what's going on in the walls of that seminiferous tubule that is forwarding reproduction and creating that process of spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. Okay, so here we are on the inside. Right now we've cut open one of those seminiferous tubules, and turns out it's not really quite like spaghetti. There is a hollow center in the middle where a lot of the interesting action happens. Okay, so now we're looking at the inside of this seminiferous tubule, and we can see that there are many different cell types lining the walls. There's a lot going on here. So we'll talk a little bit in general about kind of what these cell types are doing, but this is definitely a complex process we'll have to revisit in later lectures. So the stem cells are known as the spermatogonia. These guys are the stem cells. What I mean by stem cells is they are going to constantly be growing and dividing. They're providing that genesis part of that spermatogenesis. Okay, so these guys are going to keep dividing over and over again, and they're going to reproduce and create more cells. So they're going to be responsible for making right, the spermatids. As the cells undergo that process, everything that is in the wall of the seminiferous tubule is going to be moving towards the center. Okay, so our stem cells, the spermatogonium, they're always going to be contained in that outer layer. Okay, and as cells divide and get produced from those spermatogonium, they're going to get pushed towards the middle of the wall and then eventually pushed towards the center of the wall, which is known as the lumen. Lumen is a general term in anatomy and physiology and just refers to a hollow center. The middle of your blood vessels have a lumen. The middle of your digestive tract has a lumen. It just means a hollow center. So this is what we're working towards. We're trying to divide and make these spermatids and push them towards the lumen. And if we look here a little bit more closely, right, we knew that the final product, the mature product, the spermatozoa that undergoes spermatogenesis, right, that has a really different, what we say, morphology. Okay? Those cells look a lot different than these round animal cells, these stem cells that are giving rise to the final product. Right? They've got this tiny little head and this long tail. So we can see the most mature and the most obviously sperm cell looking structures are towards the middle of that lumen. We're describing that characteristic shape of that head and that tail as differentiated. Okay. And once we get to that point, when they reach the lumen and they're fully mature, they're simply going to let go, and then they're going to float down through that hollow center, that lumen, and they're going to work their way through the testes to the very end. This is a picture actually taken from an actual seminiferous tubule. This is someone's really fancy microscope in their lab, and they've colorized the walls of the seminiferous tubule this light blue color, and then you could see the tails of the mature spermatozoa reaching out towards the middle of the lumen. It almost looks like they're kind of getting pulled or flushed towards the center. So it really does look like that in real life. All right, I want to take just a moment to step away from the process of spermatogenesis and talk about a little bit of a disease state here, testicular cancer. Okay. This is a relatively rare disease, but it does indeed afflict a number of people in the population. And the reason why I want to talk about it here, okay, is because we need to kind of figure out what cancer is initially before we really have this discussion. So let's look at the bottom of the slide. What is cancer? This is irregular cell division. Okay? And it's usually the stem cells that are afflicted. So the stem cell has the job of making the mature, the immature and then later mature sperm cells. And what that stem cell is going to do is just divide. And it's going to be on a program, and it's going to have a regular process where it makes so many cells in a given day. If you get cancer, something happens to that stem cell where it goes off of its normal routine. It starts spitting out lots of cells left and right. It starts making mistakes. And whenever we go off of our normal routine and we're overproducing cells, we have this irregular cell division. We have an over cell division. There's too many cells. We start to get tumors, all right, lumps and bumps where we're making extra cells. And because it is the stem cells, we're attributing a defect in the spermatogonia as the reason for testicular cancer. Again, this is a rare disease, but it is the #1 cause of cancer in males ages 15 to 30. So this is, in fact, a young man's disease. Survival rate is pretty good. Okay. What is usually done as treatment is the afflicted testicle is simply removed. Usually it's just one and not both. So that can impair fertility. You're down a testicle, so that is going to lower your sperm producing capability. And you're also down a gonad, a reproductive organ that makes hormones. So you could have low testosterone and really experience characteristics, symptoms of what we really attribute to menopause, low estrogen, right? You might have hot flashes, low libido, you might have impotence, problems with sexual function. The good thing is usually after a little bit of time is given, the surviving testicle will pick up a little bit of the slack. It will grow a little bigger. It will take over some of that job. In the meantime, treatment is simply just to give some testosterone injections to bring the person back to a normal hormone level. Okay, that's all we have in the first lesson today. So we have kind of a thorough introduction to the testes. Okay, you can watch the next video or you can pause there and take some notes.